Miércoles y como cada 15 días toca el espacio de Quartz, esta publicación líder en temas de tecnología, de política y de sociedad en Estados Unidos, una publicación con la que Foro Global hizo una alianza de contenidos hace ya más de un mes. Nos enlazamos en esta ocasión con Thomas McBee. Él es autor de numerosas publicaciones que han sido premiadas por distintos medios como el mejor libro del año del 2014. Previamente trabajó para Vice y ha escrito las columnas Self-Made Man para Rumpus y The American Man para Pacific Standard. Sus ensayos y reportajes han aparecido en el periódico The New York Times, en la revista Playboy y en Glamour. Ahora es editor senior de Quartz. Thomas, welcome to Foro Global. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good. How are you?
I'm very, very happy to have you. I'd like to start by this debate over the Google diversity policies. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that during the 1980s and 1990s, different American private companies started to have this policy of inclusion. And then suddenly, with the presidency of Barack Obama, the government, the US government, opened up its policies also and started to talk about the inclusion of LGBT people, the recognition of same-sex marriage, and etc. And now with Donald Trump in the presidency, there seems to be a backlash. But before talking about politics, let's talk about the public enterprises and public companies, private companies, sorry. We've been showing different pieces here in Foro Global about the difference, the gender gap, as we call it, in Silicon Valley. No? And Google, of course, is one of these companies in Silicon Valley. Why don't you tell us what happened? Why there was this debate over the resignation, the firing of this man who published a letter?
Yeah, so over the weekend, this internal document that was written by an engineer named James Damore went internally viral within Google, and then a publication in the U.S. called Motherboard published the document. It was 10 pages long. It was called Google's Ideological Echo Chamber, and basically it makes the argument that women and men are biologically different, and that the reason why there's a pay gap and a gender gap in tech is because women aren't suited for jobs in tech. So it sort of takes up these nature versus nurture kind of things and tries to make an argument that the reason why there's a gap in gender diversity in tech isn't because of the culture or because of Google not hiring enough women, but because women aren't suited for that sort of work. So what ended up happening was once the public heard about it, people were very outraged, and then the engineer was fired on Monday, and he now says he's pursuing legal action by filing a complaint regarding his firing, and that's about where we are now.
Sure. What do you make of Google's response, not only of firing this man who published this manifesto, but also about Google's policies of inclusion? Do you think that they're in the right way? Do you think that it's like, or could they do better to include more people?
Well, they're under investigation right now for underpaying women employees. So this is not a great time for Google in general. This is sort of the worst time for them to have an employee come out and say this sort of thing. Silicon Valley in general has been facing a lot of controversy around. Uber had that harassment crisis where 20 employees were fired, and the CEO had to step down because of creating a culture of harassment, including sexual harassment. Now Google's under investigation for underpaying women employees. So Silicon Valley is facing a lot of concerns about the way it treats women. In terms of should this man have been fired? Of course. I mean, he makes an argument that's inherently sexist and sort of puts it out there and suggests that he's trying to engage in a rational debate. I think the way Google handled it was really great. I think that the memo the CEO wrote was correct in encouraging freedom of ideas and sort of wanting to keep the Google culture of questioning culture and questioning authority intact, but saying that it would have been okay if the memo had sort of asked questions about why do we pursue this kind of diversity training instead of this kind, or sort of wanting to make suggestions to make that better, but it didn't do that. It instead made an argument that was inherently sexist and created an environment that made women feel unsafe. So firing this man and firing him quickly was the right thing to do.
Sure. Let's talk about politics now, because recently President Donald Trump announced the reversal of a policy implemented by President Barack Obama, which was not only Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was repealed during the Barack Obama's presidency, but also the inclusion of trans people in the army. Now Donald Trump is threatening trans people and lying, saying that the cost of having trans people in the army is so expensive and so high that they need to reverse this policy. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of trans people in the U.S. are in the Army. It's actually trans people are a much higher percentage of the trans population joins the U.S. Army than any other minority group because of the access to education and opportunity and that sort of thing. So this is not a small group. I mean, it's with maybe somewhere between 6,000 and 15,000 active service members currently serving. So on a national security level, it means pulling people out of positions all over the world for no actual reason. I mean, Barack Obama had put in this policy that allowed trans people to serve openly. The military, as far as the reporting I've read, was actively trying to get that instated, and this sort of came out of left field and doesn't seem to have any true benefit, and in fact jeopardizes a lot of people. And my overall argument about it that I've written about is that it's not going to actually eradicate trans people in the Army. You can be in the Army and be trans and just not tell anyone. So all it's doing is denying them health care and potentially upping their risk for suicide. So trans people are highly likely to stay in the U.S. military. It's just they can't be out. I don't see the purpose of it, like many of Trump's policies that seem to be very mysterious. The only thing that this has in common with anything else is that it's an undoing of an Obama policy, and that's the only trend I personally see.
Yeah. Sure. Do you see the LGBT movement united behind against this Trump's announcement? Because at the beginning of his presidency, we saw a lot of women on the streets and the March on Washington and etc. and on some other movements as well. But what do you make of the LGBT movement? Where is it now?
I think that the U.S. is in a time where we're pretty challenged because there's a culture war going on, and we have a president who ran on a populist message, who made that message about economic injustice, and now has shifted it into sort of fermenting whatever cultural war is happening at the time, and seems to have no real strategy beyond continuing to stoke up. This is the right-wing interest. These left-wingers are doing this thing. So it's so chaotic, I think, for people to try to even understand what's going on a lot of the time, that sort of seeing people band together, there's just a lot of different segments of the population that are frustrated for different reasons, and a lot of confusion about what's going on. I do think that these sort of flashpoints, like the Silicon Valley situation, where most people who are on the alt-right were offended by the situation and agreed that this wasn't the right thing to do, and that were supportive of Google's decision to fire this man. I think these sorts of moments, have been good for us in a way, because it's sort of something that seems pretty morally clear. But on the other hand, James Damore immediately went on to the alt-right talk show circuit following getting fired. So we're in a very stratified experience of our country right now, and it's hard to sort of be in the same reality as other people.
The LGBT movement needs a lot of resilience, as usual. Thank you so much, Thomas McBee, for this minute for Foro Global. It's a pleasure having you.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Gracias a ti por habernos acompañado esta noche en Foro Global. Soy Genaro Lozano. En 15 días volverás a ver el espacio de Quartz, la revista Quartz aquí en Foro Global. Por lo pronto te deseo muy buenas noches y te espero mañana en punto de las 11 de la noche para una nueva emisión de Foro Global. Muy buenas noches.